The galaxy received Earth's warning. Attack again and be annihilated. The Vorath fleet moved at 3:17 in the morning, Earth's Standard Time. There was no warning, no signal, no 30-minute surrender countdown this time. The ship simply began to advance, all at once, in a formation so wide it stretched across a quarter of the solar system. Earth's outer monitoring stations caught the movement immediately and screamed alerts through every command channel available. Colonel Hyun was asleep when his communicator went off. He was dressed and in his command center within 4 minutes. On the screens in front of him, the scope of what was coming was already becoming clear. "How many?" he asked. The officer at the sensor station answered without looking up. "Best estimate right now is 18,000 ships. The first attack had used 6,000. Hyun looked at the screens for a moment. Then he sat down, opened his tactical display, and started issuing orders. His voice was completely even. "Activate the outer platforms. Wake up every ground battery. Tell the tunnel units to be ready on my mark." He did not panic. There was no time for it. There was only the next task, and the one after that. Commander GA was already awake when the alert came. She had developed the habit of sleeping lightly since the first attack, and the tone of the alarm system told her everything she needed to know before she even looked at the screen. She was aboard the EFS Gwangmu within 20 minutes, the ship already running on full combat power. Around her, Earth's orbital fleet, now 78 ships compared to the 12 of 6 months ago, was moving into formation. They were still outnumbered on a scale that was almost impossible to think about clearly. But the fleet they had now was not the same fleet that had scrambled desperately during the first attack. Every ship had been upgraded. Every captain had been trained differently, and spread across the solar system, hidden in the dark between planets and tucked behind moons were the platforms. Take had designed them. Over 400 automated weapons platforms, each one built around a core of reverse-engineered Vorath technology, mixed with human modifications that the Vorath had never imagined. They were not crude. They didn't need to be. They ran on Nara's adapted energy cores, which meant they had effectively unlimited power for combat operations. They were distributed, networked, and nearly impossible to locate from a distance because they were coated in the synthetic hull material Take's team had developed, which, among other things, absorbed sensor signals rather than reflecting them. The Vorath fleet didn't know they were there. The battle began when the Vorath advance formation crossed the boundary of Jupiter's orbit. The first wave of Vorath ships came in fast and confident, in a tight arrow formation designed to punch through Earth's orbital defense line and open a path for the landing fleets behind them. It was a formation the Vorath had used successfully against 11 other civilizations. It was elegant. It was practiced. It worked by concentrating firepower in a narrow point and overwhelming whatever stood in the way. It ran directly into a crossfire from 60 automated platforms that activated simultaneously from 3 different directions. The lead formation came apart in seconds. Not damaged, destroyed. The platforms didn't fire warning shots. They fired continuously, switching targets with mechanical speed and zero hesitation, running calculations that no human gunner could have matched. Vorath ships that tried to break formation to avoid the crossfire ran into the secondary platforms that had been positioned specifically to catch them. In the Vorath command ship, Admiral Doran was on his feet. "Where are those shots coming from?" he demanded. "Multiple sources," his tactical officer said, his voice tight. "We can't locate the platforms. They're not showing on sensors," Doran said slowly, understanding arriving a moment too late. "They reverse-engineered our hull plating and used it to hide." His tactical officer stared at him. "Pull the advance formation back, and," Doran began. The flagship shuddered. Not a small shudder. The entire ship lurched, and Doran grabbed the arm of his command chair as the lights went red. "What was that?" he said. "Something hit us," his officer said, looking at his screen with an expression Doran had never seen on the man's face before. "Something hit us through our shields." The forward shields didn't stop it. The energy absorption layer didn't stop it. He stopped. It went through everything. Doran looked at the damage report appearing on his display. The forward quarter of his ship had a hole in it. A hole, clean, precise, and approximately 12 meters wide. That was Nara's weapon. Nara was in a sealed facility 2 kilometers underground, watching a feed from the weapon platform she had built on the dark side of the moon. The weapon, she had never named it, had always called it simply the device, worked by creating a localized spacefold lasting approximately 0.003 seconds, and releasing the pressure differential as a focused beam of exotic energy. In simple terms, it punched a hole through whatever it was pointed at, regardless of the material. Shields, armor plating, energy barriers, none of those things were relevant, because the beam didn't interact with them. It interacted with the space they occupied. She had fired it 4 times in the first hour of the battle. She had hit 4 different targets, including the Vorath command ship. She had not missed once. She drank a cup of cold tea and watched the battle continue through the feed. The fighting lasted 9 hours. It was not clean. It was not easy. 3 of Earth's orbital ships were destroyed, and 2 more were badly damaged. 14 of the automated platforms were located and taken out by Vorath concentrated fire after the Vorath realized what they were dealing with and changed tactics. 200,000 people in a coastal region died when a Vorath ship, crippled and out of control, crashed into the ocean and sent a wave across 3 islands. But at the end of 9 hours, the Vorath fleet broke. Not retreated, broke. The formation collapsed inward, ships scattering in every direction, no longer following orders, because the command structure was gone. Doran's ship had been hit twice more after the first strike, and the second impact had taken out his command center. Doran was dead. His second officer, Vrek, had taken command, and made the only decision that made any sense: run. Less than 4% of the 18,000 ships that had come for Earth made it back to Vorath space. The rest were debris scattered across the inner solar system, burning slowly in the dark. Hyun stood outside his command center at sunrise and looked at the sky. It was clear. The smoke from burning wreckage in orbit had not reached the ground yet, and the sky was the ordinary blue that skies were supposed to be. He had a cup of coffee in his hand, his first in 9 hours. Somewhere up there, pieces of 18,000 ships were drifting. He drank his coffee. He thought about the young soldier from Busan who had asked him, after the broadcast, whether telling the universe who they were was a good thing. He thought maybe he had the beginning of an answer now. The galaxy received Earth's warning: attack again and be annihilated. 6 months after the first attack, Earth looked different from space. Not because the damage was gone. It wasn't, not all of it. Some coastlines were still scarred. Some craters were still too deep and too wide to fill. But around those scars, new things had appeared. Orbital platforms, defense rings, a web of satellites that didn't exist half a year ago. From a distance, Earth no longer looked like an exposed, quiet little planet sitting in the dark. It looked like something that had grown teeth. A Vorath fleet had maintained its position beyond the moon's orbit for all 6 months. They hadn't attacked again. They hadn't retreated either. They just watched. Their scouts circled the edge of Earth's new defense perimeter, never crossing it, sending information back to Admiral Doran and beyond him to the Dominion Council. What those scouts were reporting had begun to make the Council uncomfortable. Commander Jie had been the one to propose the broadcast. She had brought the idea to the Global Defense Council on a Tuesday morning, standing at the head of a long table surrounded by generals, politicians, and senior scientists. She was 34 years old and had the kind of calm in her voice that made people listen, even when what she was saying was something they had never considered before. "We send a message," she said, "not to the Vorath, to everyone." There was silence around the table. "Every known galactic frequency," she continued, "every signal band our new technology can reach, we translate it into every language our linguists have been able to decode from captured Vorath communication records, which is currently 47. She paused. "And we tell the galaxy exactly where we stand." General Park leaned forward. "And where do we stand?" GA looked at him steadily. "We're still here, and anyone who tries to finish what the Vorath started will not be." More silence. A few exchanged looks around the table. "You want to threaten the entire galaxy," one of the politicians said carefully. "I want to make a statement of fact," GA replied. "There's a difference." They debated it for 3 hours. In the end, they approved it. Not because everyone agreed, but because enough of them understood that silence was its own kind of message, and not the kind humanity could afford to send. Lunar Station 1 had been built during the second month of Earth's reconstruction. A small but functional platform on the far side of the moon. Far enough from Earth to be outside the immediate damage zone if something went wrong. Close enough to maintain full communication with the surface. It housed a crew of 40 and a communications array powerful enough, after recent upgrades, to punch a signal a very long way across the galaxy. GI took a transport up on a Thursday. She brought no speech. She had written the message herself, in her quarters, over the course of 2 evenings. It was not long. Long messages invited misinterpretation. What she wanted was something that could not be misunderstood in any language. She sat in front of the array's primary transmission console. A technician adjusted the final frequency settings. Someone offered her a glass of water. She declined. She looked at the words on the screen in front of her, read them once more. Then she nodded to the technician, and the array powered up, a low hum that filled the room and vibrated slightly in the chest. She began to speak. Her voice went out across 47 translated channels simultaneously. Broadcast on every frequency the array could reach, aimed at a spread pattern wide enough to reach every known inhabited system within range. The message was this: "This is Earth. 6 months ago, the Vorath Dominion attacked this planet without warning or cause. We did not surrender. We did not break. We are still here, and we are no longer what we were. We have one message for every civilization that is listening. We have no interest in war. We have no interest in conquest. But if any fleet, from any civilization, approaches this planet with hostile intent, we will not defend ourselves. We will destroy you, completely, permanently. We will not warn you first. We will not negotiate after aggression. We will simply end you, the way we are preparing to end the Vorath Dominion if they attack again. This is not a threat. This is a record of our intention, stated clearly, so that no one can claim they did not know. Leave us alone, and we will leave you alone. Come for us, and you will not go home." The transmission lasted 4 minutes. Then the array powered down, and the room was quiet. GA sat back in her chair and looked at the blank screen. The technician behind her let out a long breath. "That's going to reach a lot of people," he said. "That's the point," she replied. The response from the galaxy was not immediate. Signals travel at the speed of light, and even with the Vorath's more advanced relay networks, it took time. But within 3 weeks, Earth's monitoring teams had picked up fragments of transmitted reactions from other civilizations, intercepted through Vorath communication channels that Nara's team had partially decoded. The Vorath Dominion Council broadcast a public response, calling Earth's message the desperate noise of a damaged species that didn't understand its own situation. Doran reportedly said nothing when told about the broadcast. He simply went to stand by his observation window and looked at Earth for a long time. Several smaller civilizations, ones that had been under Vorath pressure for decades, went silent. The silence of something that had just heard a thing it wasn't sure it was allowed to hope for. One civilization, the Merath, who occupied a cluster of systems 200 light-years away and who had lost a colony to Vorath expansion 30 years prior, sent back a single short response on an open channel. It was not addressed to anyone in particular. It simply said, "We are listening." Two ancient civilizations, ones that the Vorath themselves referred to with something close to caution, sent nothing. But their monitoring stations, which Earth's teams could now detect, all turned to face the solar system. All of them. Back on Earth, Colonel Hune heard the broadcast replay on a screen in his command center, between two briefings on tunnel network upgrades. He listened to GI's voice without moving. When it finished, the soldier next to him, a young man from Busan who had only been in the military for 8 months, looked at him and asked what he thought. Hyun was quiet for a moment. "I think we just told the universe who we are," he said. The young soldier nodded. "Is that a good thing?" Hyun thought about the Vorath ships still sitting beyond the moon. He thought about Take's lab running 24 hours a day. He thought about Nara's 43-page paper and the weapon she was building in a sealed facility 2 kilometers underground. "Ask me again after the next attack," he said, and went back to his briefing. The galaxy received Earth's warning. Attack again and be annihilated. 3 weeks after the first attack, the world was still on fire in some places. Not the kind of fire that spreads, the kind that refuses to go out. Refineries along the Gulf Coast burned with thick black smoke. Entire sections of Mumbai were still being excavated, block by block, pulling survivors and bodies from the rubble with equal desperation. In eastern China, a crater 2 kilometers wide sat where a Vorath bombardment had struck a mountain range. The ground around it was glass. The numbers were hard to look at. Over 400,000 people had died in the first 19 hours. Another 100,000 in the days after, from injuries, from collapsed infrastructure, from secondary fires, from the cold in places where heating systems no longer worked. Almost 2 billion people had been displaced from their homes. It was the worst thing that had ever happened to the human race. And yet, the factories were running. Engineer Take had not slept in 4 days. He was not a soldier. He was not a general or a politician. He was 31 years old, with ink-stained fingers and a habit of drawing equations on any flat surface within reach. Before the attack, he had worked at Korea's Advanced Aerospace Research Center, designing propulsion systems for deep space probes. Quiet work, important work, work that rarely involved anyone shooting at him. That had changed. Now he stood in a converted underground facility outside Incheon, surrounded by 12 other engineers from 6 different countries, and they were all staring at a piece of Vorath hull plating laid out on a long metal table. It had been recovered from the landing craft that Hyun's team had shot down over Seoul. It was scratched and burned at the edges, but a large section of it was intact. Take ran his fingers along the surface. It was smooth in a way that felt wrong, not like metal, not like ceramic, not like anything he could name. He had been running tests on it for 3 straight days. "It's not an alloy," he said for perhaps the 50th time. "We know," said Rena, the materials scientist next to him, equally exhausted. "We still don't know what it is." "It behaves like a crystal lattice under pressure," Take said, "but it conducts heat like a liquid and absorbs energy like a sponge." He tapped it with his knuckle. "If we can figure out why, we can figure out how to break it. And if we can break it, we can copy it." Rena looked at him. "Can we copy something we don't understand?" Take smiled for the first time in days. "That's never stopped us before." Scientist Nara was working on something different, and considerably more dangerous. She had been a physicist at CERN before the attack. Her field was high-energy particle behavior. Her papers were read by maybe 300 people in the entire world, and she had liked it that way. She was not a public figure. She was someone who sat in quiet rooms and thought about things that most people never had reason to consider. The Vorath energy core recovered from a downed fighter craft had changed all of that. It was roughly the size of a basketball, perfectly round, warm to the touch even after 3 weeks. Whatever reaction was happening inside it, it was self-sustaining. Nara's team had run every scan available. The core was generating more energy than it should have been able to. It seemed to be drawing something from its surrounding environment and converting it. But converting what and how was not yet clear. What was clear was that if she could understand the mechanism, even partially, the applications were enormous. She sat in front of the core every morning and talked to it. Not because she believed it could hear her, she was a physicist, not a mystic, but because speaking her thoughts out loud helped her organize them. Her team had learned to leave her alone during these sessions. "You're doing something with space," she said to it quietly one morning, while the rest of the lab was still empty. "I think you're folding it, very slightly, very locally, and that fold is creating a pressure differential that you're converting to energy." She tilted her head. "Which means if I can create the same fold artificially, even for a fraction of a second." She sat very still. Then she picked up a pen and started writing. While Take and Nara worked underground, above the surface, the world was changing faster than it ever had before. The United Nations had always been a place where countries argued. That changed in the second week after the attack. It changed because there was nothing left to argue about. The Vorath fleet was still out there, sitting beyond the moon's orbit, quiet and watching. Everyone knew they would come back. Everyone knew that the next time, they would come back harder. The Global Defense Council was formed in 7 days, a speed that would have been unthinkable before. Every major nation signed. Every military force on Earth was placed under a single unified command for the first time in history. Old rivalries were not forgotten, but they were set aside because the alternative was extinction. Lieutenant Hyun was promoted to colonel and given command of ground defense coordination for the entire East Asian sector. He accepted the promotion, filed the paperwork, and went straight back to work without a celebration. There was no time. He was already redesigning defensive tunnel networks based on what he had learned in the first battle. Commander GA's orbital fleet was expanded from 12 ships to 31 within 3 weeks, with an additional 60 vessels under construction. They were still not powerful enough to fight the Vorath in open space. Not yet. But they were getting there, and they were getting there fast. Factories that had made cars were now making armor plating. Facilities that had made commercial satellites were now making weapons platforms. Research labs that had studied agricultural science were now studying alien metallurgy and propulsion systems. The entire productive capacity of the human race had turned, almost overnight, toward a single purpose: survival. And then something more than survival. 40 days after the first attack, Take's team cracked the composition of the Vorath hull material. It took them another 2 weeks to figure out how to synthesize something similar using materials available on Earth. The result was not identical. It was in fact 40% less strong than the original. But it was a foundation, something to build on. Nara submitted a theoretical paper to the Defense Council on the 48th day. It was 43 pages long. The summary at the top was 1 sentence. "If this works, we can build a weapon that nothing in the known galaxy has ever seen." In the morning, they approved full funding and cleared an entire research facility for her exclusive use. She moved in that afternoon and got straight to work. Outside, the Vorath fleet was still watching. But Earth was no longer just waiting for the next blow. It was preparing to strike first. The galaxy received Earth's warning: attack again and be annihilated. The sky above Seoul turned black at 6:42 in the morning. Not the dark of night, not the dark of clouds. It was a different kind of black. the kind that comes when thousands of ships block out the sun all at once. Lieutenant Hune was drinking his second cup of coffee when the alarm went off. He put the cup down slowly, looked out the window of the defense base, and stared up at the shapes hanging in the sky like metal mountains. He had seen simulations. Everyone in the military had. For years, governments had quietly prepared for the possibility that humanity was not alone in the universe. But no simulation ever felt like this. No training exercise ever made a man's chest tighten the way the real thing did. Hune grabbed his jacket, ran to the operations room, and found it already filled with soldiers staring at screens. Every screen showed the same thing. Ships, thousands of them. Over every major city, over every ocean, over every continent. The planet was surrounded. The voice of General Park crackled over the communication system. His voice was steady, but Hyun could hear something underneath it. The sound of a man who was afraid, but refused to show it. All units to combat positions. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Nobody said anything. Nobody panicked. They just moved. Above the atmosphere, in the cold silence of space, Admiral Doran sat in his command chair aboard the lead ship of the Vorath Dominion fleet. He was tall, gray-skinned, with 4 arms and eyes that were completely white. He had conquered 11 planets in his career. Each one had followed the same pattern. The fleet arrives, the locals panic, a few fight back weakly, and then the planet surrenders within hours. It was always fast. It was always easy. He looked at Earth through the observation window, blue and green, covered in water and forests. His scouts had reported that the inhabitants were barely spacefaring. They had no energy weapons of any real power. Their fastest ships were primitive. Their military technology was centuries behind the Vorath standard. Doran leaned back and folded 2 of his arms across his chest. "Send the surrender message," he said calmly. "Give them 30 minutes to respond." His communications officer sent the signal. In 37 languages, the message was broadcast across every human frequency. It was simple. Surrender the planet. Hand over all resources and population records. Resistance would result in destruction. They had 30 minutes. Doran expected silence, or perhaps a confused, frightened response. A plea for negotiation. That was what always happened. What he did not expect was for nothing to happen. No response came. No white flag, no panic transmission from a world leader begging for terms. The 30 minutes passed. Then 35. Then 40. Doran uncrossed his arms slowly. "They are not responding," his officer said. "I can see that," Doran replied. He stared at the planet. Then he gave the order to begin the first bombardment. The first shots hit the coast of Australia, and they hit hard. Entire sections of the coastline turned to fire. Buildings collapsed. Roads cracked open. The ground shook so hard that people hundreds of kilometers inland felt it under their feet. But even before the dust settled, something fired back. Commander GI was in orbit aboard the EFS Gwangmu, one of Earth's 12 orbital defense ships, vessels that most other species would have called primitive, but that humanity had quietly built over 15 years of careful planning. They were not powerful by galactic standards, but they were there, and they were armed, and GI had been waiting for this moment with her hands tight on the arms of her command chair. "Lock all forward guns on the closest grouping," she said. "Fire when ready." The Gwangmu opened up. Its weapons were not Vorath level, not even close. But they struck a Vorath troop carrier on its side, punching through the hull plating and igniting something inside. The carrier listed sideways and began to drift. Secondary explosions walked across its surface like bright orange footsteps. On the Vorath command ship, Doran frowned. "They fired back," his officer said, confused. "I noticed," Doran replied. now sitting forward in his chair. Across the planet below, humanity was not hiding. It was fighting. Hyun had organized the ground defense of the Seoul Corridor within 20 minutes of the first strike. He was not the highest-ranking officer in the region, but he was the fastest thinker. And right now, fast thinking was the only currency that mattered. He moved armored units into the tunnels beneath the city. Old subway lines converted to military use years ago. Surface drones launched in swarms from hidden positions. Anti-air batteries came online in the mountains east of the city. When the first Vorath landing craft came down through the clouds, it was met by 3 surface-to-air missiles simultaneously. It exploded low in the sky, and pieces of it rained down across the Han River in burning chunks. Hyun watched it fall through a camera feed on his tablet. "Again," he said quietly. His team fired again. The Vorath troops that made it to the ground were bigger than humans, stronger. Their armor was thick, and their weapons cut through concrete like paper. But they came down into streets that were already mined, already covered by snipers, already mapped out by defenders who had trained for exactly this. Every alley was a trap. Every building was a fortified position. The Vorath soldiers moved with confidence at first, then with confusion, then with something that looked very much like fear. The battle lasted 19 hours. When it was over, Earth was broken in many places. Coastlines were burning. Several cities had taken heavy damage. The death toll was in the hundreds of thousands, and it would rise. Smoke rose from a dozen countries. Satellites were down. Power was out across entire regions. But the Vorath fleet had pulled back. They had not won. They had come expecting a quick, clean conquest, and instead they had bled. 12 of their ships had been destroyed. 40 more were damaged. 3 landing divisions had been wiped out almost entirely on the ground. Doran sat alone in his command room for a long time after he gave the order to retreat to a safe distance. "They didn't surrender," his second officer said quietly, standing in the doorway. "Not one city, not one government, nothing." Doran did not answer for a moment. "No," he finally said, "they didn't." He looked at Earth on his display screen. Still blue, still green, still burning in places, still there. "Pull the fleet back to regrouping distance," he said, "and send a full report to the Dominion Council. Tell them," he paused, "tell them this planet is going to require a different approach." In the ruins of cities across Earth, people pulled survivors from the wreckage. Soldiers reloaded weapons. Engineers rushed to restore power grids. Doctors worked without stopping. Nobody was talking about surrender. Nobody even mentioned it. The galaxy received Earth's warning. Attack again, and be annihilated. The Galactic Council had not convened an emergency session in 60 years. The last time had been when the Vorath Dominion destroyed the colony world of Marath Duin without provocation. A display of power so total and so deliberate that even civilizations who had never cared much about the Marath felt something shift in the way they understood the galaxy. That session had lasted 9 days. It had ended with a strongly worded statement and no action whatsoever. The Vorath had continued their expansion. The galaxy had continued to watch. This session was called within 48 hours of the second battle at Earth. Footage from the battle had been spreading across every communication network in the known galaxy. Not because Earth had released it, but because the 4% of the Vorath fleet that escaped had brought it home, and once it was in Vorath space, it was everywhere within days. Scouts from a dozen other civilizations had also been watching, from a safe distance, recording everything, and they had sent their recordings home even faster. What those recordings showed was something the galaxy had not seen before. 18,000 Vorath warships, the largest fleet the Dominion had assembled in 2 centuries. And Earth, a planet that hadn't known it wasn't alone in the universe 14 months ago, had not just stopped them. It had taken them apart. The Council met on a station that orbited a neutral star between 4 major systems, a location chosen specifically because it belonged to nobody. The chamber was large and circular, with sections arranged for each of the 31 civilizations that held council standing. Some were represented in person, some attended through communication links. A few sent only automated observation units, which was their way of saying they were watching without committing to any position. The Marath sent their senior diplomat, an elderly woman named Cho Rin, who had spent 40 years in galactic politics, and who sat through the opening statements with the quiet focus of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by the way powerful people behaved when frightened. She had been the one who responded to Earth's broadcast 6 months ago with the message that said simply, "We are listening." She was still listening now. Commander GI arrived at the station on the 14th day after the battle, aboard a ship that Earth had scrambled to make presentable on short notice. It was not a grand vessel. It did not have the smooth, elegant lines of Vorath architecture or the ancient, weathered grandeur of the older civilization's ships. It was functional and slightly battered, and very clearly human. She walked into the council chamber alone. No bodyguards, no advisors standing at her shoulder. She had been offered both. She had declined both. She carried a small data case in her left hand. The chamber was full, every seat occupied. The ambient sound of 31 different species filling a room was a strange thing. Layers of breath and movement, and the soft background noise of translation systems running at full capacity. GA had been told to expect it. She still found it remarkable when she actually stood inside it. She set the data case on the table in front of her. She did not open it yet. She looked around the room. 6 months ago, she said, and the translation systems carried her words outward in every direction. We sent a message. We told the galaxy who we were and what we intended. Many of you thought it was a desperate statement from a damaged civilization. Some of you laughed. She paused. Some of you listened. The room was very quiet. We are not here to celebrate what happened to the Vorath fleet, she continued. We did not enjoy it. We do not enjoy war. We are not a species that has ever wanted to spend our lives building weapons and defending our home from people we never hurt. We want to explore. We want to learn. We want to meet other civilizations and discover what the universe actually contains. Because from where we were standing a year and a half ago, it seemed infinite and full of possibility. She opened the data case and placed a single device on the table. It was a projector. When she activated it, a 3-dimensional map of the solar system appeared above the table, showing Earth, its defense platforms, the orbital fleet, and, marked in red, the debris fields from the Vorath attack. This is what defending ourselves costs, she said. This is what is left of 18,000 ships. This is what it looks like when we are forced to fight. She let the room look at the map for a moment. We are not boasting. We are showing you the consequence. Because the warning we sent 6 months ago still stands. It will always stand. It is not negotiable, and it is not conditional. She deactivated the projector. But that is all we are here to say about that. The rest of what we want to say is different. She looked around the room again, at the Marath diplomat, who was watching her steadily, at the representatives of civilizations she didn't yet fully understand, at the automated units in the back that represented species too cautious or too old to commit to a reaction yet. We want to talk, we want to trade, we want to build something with whoever in this room is willing to build it. We are new to this. We make mistakes. We are going to make more. But we are here, and we are not going away. And we would rather spend the next 1,000 years learning from the people in this room than spending them making more debris fields. She sat down. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Cho-Rin, the Marath diplomat, who had not spoken in the entire session, leaned slightly forward in her seat and said, in a voice that was old and dry and very steady, "I think we have some things to discuss." Colonel Hyun heard about the council session through a broadcast relay that reached Earth 17 hours after it happened. He was in his command center, reviewing the ongoing work of clearing orbital debris when the full recording was transmitted. He listened to GI's address twice. The young soldier from Busan, who was not so new anymore, who had been through 2 battles and 100 sleepless nights, was sitting nearby. When the recording finished, he looked at Hyun. "Is it a good thing, telling the universe who we are?" Hyun set down the tablet he was holding. He looked at the sky through the window, blue and clear, the same ordinary blue it had always been. Except now, he knew what was out there past it. He thought about 400,000 people who died in the first attack. He thought about the debris fields. He thought about Take working 4 straight days without sleep over a piece of alien metal. About Nara talking to an energy core in an empty lab at 6 in the morning. About GI standing in front of 31 civilizations with a data case and no bodyguards. He thought about the Marath diplomats saying, "I think we have some things to discuss." "Yeah," Hyun said. "I think it is. The kind of quiet that comes not from emptiness, but from everything holding its breath, waiting to see what comes next." For the first time in a very long time, that felt like something other than a threat. It felt like the beginning of something.